This is Blackness Castle, known as the ship that never sailed for kind of obvious reasons. And the other day, it made my blood boil.
It's at least partly to do with me being old and grumpy, but bear with me on this one.
I saw a post from one of these Scottish pages that only ever seems to show AI-generated slop. You know the kind of thing. They describe the castle's story in big expressive words using lots of M dashes, and they'd added a picture of something that looked a bit like Blackness Castle.
I thought AI was supposed to be for the mundane stuff, not the fun stuff.
Anyway, this is the genuine article. No AI needed. It was built by Sir George Crichton on this black rock behind me in the 1440s, and aesthetically it's what you'd probably call functional, but there's a reason for that.
In its lifetime, it's been a family home, a royal castle, a garrison, and a prison. But it's probably most famous for doubling up as Fortwilliam in Outlander.
It's also appeared in Outlaw King and Mary Queen of Scots. Originally, it was a family residence, and it was and is, as you can see, pretty imposing. But as it turned out, not imposing enough.
I'm a wee bit more intimidated by the inside. I can't imagine what it was like before they had safety barriers.
Blackness was the port that served Linlithgow, a royal residence at the time, and in 1453 the land passed into the hands of James II. James IV is the only monarch known to have visited here more than once.
There are records of him attending mass here and being entertained by musicians. And at one point he turned up with his ship, the Great Michael, in its day the biggest vessel in the world. James IV loved a project.
He loved building ships, he loved building houses, and that's partly because he was married to Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister, and probably trying to keep up with the in-laws.
But his successor had a bigger impact on this place.
In 1537, his son, James V, began converting it into state prison and a military fortification in response to a threat from his uncle Henry.
It was completed in 1542, but by the end of the following year, James was dead. His infant daughter Mary was on the throne.
And Henry was busy causing as much damage and mayhem as possible because the Scots had agreed and then refused to marry the Queen off to his son, Edward.
As I say, it was a state prison. This is where they put you if you were too much of a nuisance. But there were different classes of nuisance.
If you were one of the elite, you got to live in the central tower, in comfort, with plenty to eat and even room for your family.
The most famous resident was Cardinal David Beaton, the Bishop of St Andrews, one-time regent for Mary Queen of Scots.
He came here in 1543. Eventually he made it back to his home in St Andrews Castle, but he didn't last long. At the beginning of what would become the Reformation, he had the Protestant preacher George Wishart burned in front of St Andrews Castle for preaching heresy. Then he was murdered himself, and his disfigured body was draped across the ramparts of his own castle. If you were a more middle-class prisoner, you might wind up over there behind me in the stem tower, the kind of bow of the ship. Still in relative comfort with modern conveniences, but with the added catch of there being a hole in the floor. That was the hatch that your lower class of prisoner was put through on their way into the dungeon. So if you lived above, the screams and smells and whatever else would drift up through the hatch from the dungeon below.
This place does look kind of impregnable, but like I said earlier, wasn't quite impregnable enough.
A few people laid siege to it down the years,
but in 1650, Oliver Cromwell's army hit the castle with heavy guns, devastating the defences. You can still see the pockmarks in the walls today.
In the 1670s and 1680s, Charles II and James VII imprisoned Covenanters here. Later, following the Act of Union in 1707, it was a garrison for the British Army. Later still, it was home to prisoners of war from France, Spain and the fledgling America.
Blackness Castle ended its official military role as a munitions dump.
It was finally given up by the British government after the First World War. It's lasted pretty well since the 1500s, which is no surprise given how it was built. But I like to think, having gone through all that, it deserves a bit better than to be AI fodder.